Alright, welcome back to Inside Los Angeles, our very first actual video. If you haven't checked out our intro video, definitely check that out in the link above. But we're going to be talking about everything Los Angeles, and today I want to talk about the new rent control law that goes into effect. The city council voted for it last month, like just before Veterans Day. So we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on if it's good or bad. But let's first break the law. Not break the law. Let's break down the law. So this is from Politico, a great source for anything politics. And yes, so for the first time in decades, 40 years to be exact, the LA City Council overhauled its rent controls on the Wednesday before November 12th, sharply lowering annual rent increases facing tenants in one of the country's most expensive cities. Right now, landlords are allowed to increase rent between 3% and 8% annually on rent stabilized apartments. Rent stabilized apartments are from buildings built before October 1978, and there are 1.5 million Angelenos living in those rent controlled apartments right now, and which equates to about 651,000 units. That is 651,000 units. That's a lot. There are about 4 million people that live in Los Angeles total, in the city proper. So, 1.5 million is almost half of LA living in rent stabilized apartment. The new laws will be allowed to increase rents by just 1 to 4% each year. So it's going from 3 to 8%, cutting that in half basically, right? From 1% to 4%. So that's a big decrease, which, hey, it might seem amazing for the tenants, right? Not so fast. Let me go ahead and explain. Again, there's plenty of laws in Los Angeles and around at least California. I can't speak for the rest of the country, but at least LA and California, which you'll learn on this channel, are very well intentioned. They're super well intentioned, but they really have bad outcomes. They have good intentions but bad execution. Correct. So, like this rent control law, I think is one of them. 3 to 8%. It's not too bad for each year, but going to 1 to 4% is going to make it drastically worse, right? Because already on a rent stabilized unit, the developer doesn't make a lot of money. That's the point, right? They don't make a lot of money. But if the developer doesn't make a lot of money, and they can't really, you know, do things to maintain and renovate the building, right? Um, so if with this the percentages, um, with the percentages being lowered, that means the developers are making even less money. Meaning that these older buildings from 1978 are not going to be they're gonna fall out and be maintained terribly, potentially, because developers won't have the incentive to spend more money on them when they're making even less money from the rent stabilization units now. So those buildings will then fall into disrepair, providing an even worse or a bad living experience for the tenants themselves, um, because the landlords won't spend the money to maintain them. So that is the problem, I think, with this new law that goes into effect um, pretty soon, if not already. It's either in effect like now or next year, but it's going to go into effect certainly by January or July of next year, if it's not in effect already. And again, it's a good intention but a bad execution, as those people, those 651,000, or sorry, 1.5 million people that live in those 651,000 units could face worse living conditions over time, as their landlords will be collecting less money. So they won't have as much money to put in to maintain the existing buildings. Of course, they'll keep things up to like earthquake codes and stuff like that, but what I'm saying is they won't maybe have like fancy amenities, right? But maintenance is maybe they'll paint the building, maybe they'll do some tree trimming. I don't know. Maybe they'll give the building a facelift, right? Maybe the tenants themselves, maybe they can upgrade from carpet to hardwood floors if if they had the extra money. But now, no, they won't. They will not have the extra money to go ahead and do any of that stuff. So, yes, the tenants will pay less money or less of a rent increase, which is great, but they can sacrifice that for a worse living experience down the line. Rent stabilization units, I think every type of housing has their place in every city. But speaking on just Los Angeles here, like you said, half of the units are rent stabilization. Or sorry, half of the people live here live in those types of units, which is kind of like a bigger problem, right? Housing affordability, and you'll see me, reference this in a lot of other videos. But if they just made it easier to build housing and streamline the permitting process instead of blowing uh, rent caps or whatever, then housing would be so affordable or much more affordable they wouldn't even have to live in. People wouldn't even have to live in a rent stabilized unit. Rents maybe all rents across the city, or most of them, maybe as much or close to the rents of the rent stabilized units because we so much new supply. That is what the LA City Council should be focusing on instead of lowering the rent caps for tenants, because then it's another reason why developers won't want to go build new housing here. It's another reason why landlords won't want to, you know, be a owner of that building, because they're just won't be making any money. The name of the game is profit. All right, the people in the private and the free market, people want to obviously make profit. If you own a business, if I own a business, if you own a business, you want to make money, or else you go bankrupt, right? So you got to be able to make some money, even if it's you own a rent stabilized unit. Because, like I said, why, why would you have the motivation to maintain that unit um if if you're if you're not making any money? And let's say all these buildings start becoming in disrepair. Let's say the LA City Council makes a new law or ordinance out that you have to developers out there, the landlords have to maintain the building and spend all this money again. Well, then they'll just sell it. Then they'll just sell it, and maybe no one wants to buy it. Then the city will have to buy it, and it's just a kind of a train wreck. So I think this is not the greatest idea. Short term, yes. Again, it'll help people out, but long term, the LA City Council, most of them lacked vision. A few of them do have vision, and that's encouraging. And part of the reason I started this channel is to go ahead and kind of talk to you about the upcoming elections in 2026 for LA and California. We're going for a new mayor, governor, and several city council members. So it's very, very important the elections in 2026 to elect leadership and people that will change and move the state and city forward in a good direction that equals more housing production. More housing production brings more jobs, higher incomes, nicer streets, more taxes for city services, and more taxes without raising taxes. It increases the tax base, right? Because more people moving here. Yep. Again, more jobs. More jobs includes could be higher paying jobs. That increases the tax base, right? People are wealthier, but paying higher taxes without ever putting another tax increase on the ballot. You get your city coffers start to rise up, so you can then fund as long as the city services. And no Karen Bass stripped in the latest budget. She stripped a lot of city services while increasing the LAPD budget. That'll be another video on its own. But strip city services like sanitation and stuff like that. And so then you just have dirty streets, and then it's just a downward spiral negatively. Whereas the other way, more housing production, more people, more jobs, is a upward spiral in a positive way. So yeah, rent stabilization ordinance, again, as I've said, a good idea, uh, but bad execution. What do you guys think about the rent stabilization ordinance? Are you one of the people living in one of these units? Maybe you have a different take. Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to learn all about Inside Los Angeles. Stay tuned as we talk about new ordinances. The elections coming up next year in July, or June and July for the primaries, and new laws and stuff like that that are going to Newsom's desk and stuff throughout the next cycle there, starting next year through the summertime. and just all about Los Angeles in general because there'll be new metro openings and stuff like that that we'll be talking about and it'll be super exciting. So make sure to subscribe and like the video and comment your thoughts on this topic down below. Once again, I'm Ethan, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.